starting today with our top picks of curricula, because for new home educating parents, the choices out there are there's so many. We've got the whole world at our fingertips with the internet. And quite honestly, the choices can be overwhelming. And so that's why we're just going to share tried and tested products that we've used ourselves and which we know are popular with a wide range of other home educators. And we'll just talk about what's good about them, and hopefully it helps new people to narrow down their options and have some criteria by which to evaluate what they're going to pick for their own families. Definitely. So we're going to start with social studies first. Shall we start with the older kids first and go down this time? How about that?
Yeah, we can do that, because I think in the high school years, kids are already starting to see their exit route. So we have fewer choices in that space that we've used and enjoyed with our kids. So let's jump in there with high school years. And to clarify, social studies we see as obviously your cultural studies, your geography, and your history. So that's what we're focusing on today. And we always enjoy a literature-based approach. So maybe before we start with the high school, we can just run through some of the benefits of literature-based learning. We can bounce between the two of us, but for me, being parents with lots of children, both of us, 10 between the two of us, it has been one of the most simplifying ways to home educate, because you can do many children on one storybook, and each child will go to it and feast on what's in there and go away with their own nourishment. It's not like everybody has to have a separate textbook and you've got one child busy in Asia and another child busy in Africa and another child busy in America, because they're all on these different grades that some academic decided was important for them to all learn about Asia in grade 4, and another academic said, oh, but we have to do Africa in grade 5. You can put everybody together on literature, and that was a hugely simplifying thing for me. Other benefits of a literature-based approach to social studies, Shills?
It's sanity saving for the mother, definitely, and it saves you so much stress because the kids generally enjoy listening to stories. And what I found is that I hated history at school because we had to memorize facts, names, dates. It was just dry, and I had one teacher who tried to make it fun, and the rest of the time it was just a horrible subject. But as an adult, learning it with my kids, it's the way I wish I'd been taught, because reading a story, you don't only learn the history and the facts and the dates and who was the governor and who was the people, but you learn about the social context and the culture of the day, the struggles people faced. You develop so much depth of understanding and sympathy that it just becomes an emotionally enjoyable experience. So, and I think it's not just that it's fun. I think it's important that we get a better understanding of what were the conflicts and the struggles and the things that people sacrificed and died for and lived through in the past, because then we appreciate the freedom and the lessons that were learned so much more. And I think it's every country has its struggles, and for us as South Africans too, it was wonderful to see that it's not just our country that's had a history of bloodshed and conflict and wars. It's been everywhere. So literature from other countries was a great tool to learn those things.
Yeah, and because you're using literature, you can look at a situation that happened, an event in history, or the rise of a nation, and you can look at it from all these different aspects instead of getting these little tidbits of information from textbooks, which is generally one person's biased opinion. So yes, that for me, for history, it has to be done through literature, and particularly living books that stir your heart and stir your children's hearts, and are things that that hang on you so that you can talk about them. So
I just want to jump in. I think many people ask us, because we've written Footprints, how do you handle bias in history? Because history is always told from the ruling party's point of view, that every government rewrites history.
Yeah.
And what we've learned and what we've done with our kids is we've learned that you've got to always read both sides of the stories. And we need to teach our children that there is always more than one perspective. And sometimes you've got to read between the lines to see what is the ideology and what is the perspective that's coming through. And that's how we handle history. And that's why most people with our footprints programs have been able to enjoy them no matter what their cultural background, because they know that there isn't just one perspective, and that's the lesson.
Yes.
So even if there is bias, that becomes the lesson.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the last thing with regards to the way that we approach history with our children is that we did it in a multisensory way. We would read a storybook, we would set that story or that history in place, on the map, so the kids knew where it was going. We'd put it on a timeline so that they knew relative to their birth and their grandparents' birth and perhaps the birth of Christ, where these things fitted in. And then on top of that, we would, we would also add in hands-on projects and cooking from that country. And when the kids were younger, we thoroughly enjoyed doing things like your Middle Ages banquet, everybody dressed up and we made our shields, and it lends itself to that, because what happens is that if we do it in a textbook and you've read a little snippet of information and your children have written 3 lines about it, you think, history done for the day. Whereas doing it in this way, your history learning and your passion for more and more information about that time carries on. You taste of it when you're young, and it carries on as you grow. So 2 different ways of looking at it, because history can't just be learned from a paragraph. It's got to be felt and understood. So with that perspective, let's jump in with our top pick for high school years.
Well, for me, there was only one, and that was Sunlight Curriculum. There was one of the high school cores that I didn't enjoy, but by the time we got to the high school years, I'd learned that we are free to pick and choose what we like. If we start reading a book and it's really not resonating with us, we toss it out. I replaced one of the spines with an easier to read one that was provided in that particular core. But in general, for the rest of them, they were all fabulous, and it was really a wonderful investment to have all these great books at our fingertips and to be able to learn about people and places that I'd never even learned in my own school education. So it was definitely a great tool, and that's the only one I'd recommend.
Yeah,
for high school.
I'm with you on that. When we did the high school Sunlight, we didn't follow the schedule. That was another thing that we threw out. Yeah. We just went straight into those books because they were so rich. You can look at the 20th century and the world wars. There's also a Christian worldview program for the high school years. And then obviously our children that moved into Cambridge, only one of them did history as their final subject. And we took the Cambridge spine and we still took all the Sunlight books and we added it on, because for her to go from this beautiful, rich, literature-based style of education and go into a very narrow Cambridge, she said, I can't visualize how the Jews felt during, the Holocaust. I can't visualize. So we pulled in those books for her, and definitely. There's another one I'll mention briefly called Streams of Civilization. I found it quite dry, but it is very thorough and it has a Christian worldview. And it is interesting, and there's some interesting projects in it. But when you compare it to the richness of Sunlight, I would say that it would be definitely a second choice. But I do know that there are some parents out there who are that's the one for them, Streams of Civilization. Okay, so let's look at primary grades, and let's start with world history and world geography. What were your topics in that space?
We always use Sunlight in between our footprints programs. So for world history, we enjoyed a couple of their what they call cores, which are the different grade packages that they provide. In one season, we also did a child's geography,
Yes.
which I think the name has changed now, but it's by Anne Voskamp. And that was a focus on the geography of the earth. So we looked at things like ocean currents and the tectonic plates and the layers of the atmosphere. So it was physical geography rather than political geography and countries and things like that. And it was lovely because it had a Charlotte Mason approach. So it's written in a very, it's like she's sitting there telling your kids all this stuff in a very conversational style with nice narration prompts every so often through the chapters, and a few little projects that we could do to make it more interesting and practical. So I think probably those two are my top picks for world history and some geography. There are actually sequels to that geography program now as well, which I haven't used, but I'm sure they're just as lovely as that original one.
Yeah, she did the Holy Land, and that was phenomenal. Thoroughly enjoyed looking at the geography of that, the Middle East and that sort of thing. It was, in fact, at one stage, that was just where I wanted to go, because she had stimulated so much passion about this land and the people that lived in it, that you want to, it's not, you get to a point where she's taken you and she's told you the story, but now you want to go and see and touch and smell and hear and go and stand at the bazaar. So it was a really lovely program. We obviously also use Sunlight, but again, we dropped the guide in the higher primary school years, and we use Story of the World as our spine book. So that's been sold by the Book Connection now. But what it is that there's 4 read aloud books called a textbook, but it's really not a textbook. They chapters on different times in history and different people groups and world cultures. And after that, when we were using it, they didn't have the activity books, except for my youngest one. He was kind of age. And the activity books then have a lot of extension activities where you start looking at the geography of the place that you are studying in history. There's a lot of hands-on projects. I mean, you can mummify a chicken and you make a clay tablet, and you try your hand at papyrus, and you do the volcanoes. Lots and lots of fun. And there's also a language approach in that as well, the narrations and that sort of thing. So that was also a lovely way to do history, doing an activity book and a read aloud book. It's a whole year. Unless you want to be on a hamster wheel, which nobody wants. We want to travel and savor and stop and dig into. So yeah, I'm with you. Good. That those are the 3 choices that we also did, and that wasn't in collaboration.
And then of course we did footprints at some point during those primary grades, so that our kids would also learn about our country. And what I found really interesting was Sunlight has a combination core that's called Core D and E. And because it was kind of 2 years condensed into one, we took about 1.5 years to work through that. And then we took about 1.5 years to work through footprints. Yes. And then with my second set of kids, I think I did it the other way around, but it doesn't matter which order you do them. Yeah. What's so interesting is that you see that there were Huguenots who came to South Africa, and there were Huguenots who went to America, and there were pioneers who traveled across America and settled in the West, and there were the trekkers who trekked through South Africa, and they were just and then how the slave trade was sort of this triangle from Africa and America and Europe, and they were getting slaves from the East as well, from Madagascar, and South Africa was also part of that. So there were so many similarities that it was really interesting to compare those.
Well, that's a perfect introduction to talk about footprints. So if we that is the world history and geography that we just looked at in the primary grades. In South African history, we ended up, that is where our friendship started, back in 2002. Well, actually just a bit before that, because we launched Footprints in 2002. And it was because we wanted our children to not only understand and have this rich experience of world history and world geography. We wanted them to have that of our own country. And we've got other videos, I can pop the link below, where we talk about how footprints came to be. So that's not what this is about. It's about how parents can use literature, South African literature, and go on a journey through our country's past, and stopping off at the major events and looking at them in detail, again, using literature. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. We've got it, and then we can just do a chat about Voetspore and then the new one that's on its way out.
Yeah. So Footprint starts in the 1480s when Portuguese sailors started sailing around South Africa, and we happened to have to find a lovely story about a little boy who stowed away on a ship, and it really makes that piece of history come to life. And then what's really fascinating is our next story is the opposite side of the story. It's a Khoi boy who lived in Mossel Bay area at the same time, and it's his perspective of these funny looking white people and their funny clothes and their funny ships coming to Africa, and there's this meeting of the two cultures. And then we go through the establishment of the country, the Cape as a colony by the Dutch, and the British rule there, and the arrival of the Huguenots and the 1820 settlers, and then the clashes with the other indigenous tribes like the Xhosa and the Zulu on the Great Trek. And that program ends with the Anglo-Boer War around the beginning of the 20th century, the 1900s. And we've tried to, as far as possible, give books that show different perspectives of these clashes. So a good example is we've got 3 about the Anglo-Boer War. One is written from a British little boy's perspective. Another one is a little boy whose mom and dad, one was Boer, one was a Brit, and they were captured in the siege of Kimberley. And then we have another one that's written from the Baralong perspective of the Black people who were also in the siege. And so you get 3 different perspectives of that war. And it just helps our children to understand, as we were saying, that, you know, there's always bias and there's right and wrong on all sides of clashes and arguments, and you know, no government is perfect. So it was very interesting even for us as adults to learn all that ourselves, because of the kind of biased history and upbringing that we'd had as white little girls going to school in apartheid under the nationalist government in the 80s. And then our footprints into the 21st century program, we're going to actually be updating that, but it's going to take children through the next 100 years up into this century. And the same with the Voetspore, which is the Afrikaans equivalent. Yeah. So yeah, that's quite a fun project that we've still got to tackle.
It's basically consumed the last 20 years of our lives. But I think that the thing is that we know that not only did it work for our family, it was tested and tried within our family. It's that it's been loved by thousands of homeschoolers because it works. It's a way of learning that works. The exciting news is that we are now launching our Footprints Nature Quest, which is a South African journey through the geography and the biomes of our land. And it can stand alone. It's going to have its own literature package, or it can attach to either of the footprints on our land for 8 to 12s, or the next one up the last 100 years. And that's been our endeavor over the last year. Very, very excited. Have collabed with another well-known homeschooling mom on that. She's been helping us tweak it and finish it off for homeschoolers. And that one is just to using literature, but also using the information in the guide to stir up our children's wonder about South Africa. We have such beauty and stuff that we didn't even know, again, like with history, here with geography, stuff that we didn't even know existed in our country, and how biodiverse it is. So that's really exciting for the primary school years. Preschool. Let's talk about preschool social studies, what the focus should be. We've got quite a clear understanding of how kids learn. So why don't you share that part?
Well, I think, well, you agree with me, I know. We believe that when children are little, they should, and you do this naturally, you don't need a program to do this, but our children learn about me, my body, they learn about their family, they learn about their grandparents and their extended family and their community. So it's a picture of concentric circles getting wider and wider. And so we believe that once they're sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, that's when you start teaching them more about their community and their country first, before venturing into world history, which we already chatted about in the older age category. And that's where our Little Footprints program is ideal, because that's what it is. You're reading stories that are set in South Africa. Most of them are actually contemporary South African stories about children in the cities, at the beach, exploring a river, going to school, doing different things. And it helps our children to learn about the different cultures and different people. It's got nature study and it's got geography, and we give you a map where you can plot where each story happened in South Africa. So they start getting an idea of, we live in this town and this story happened over there, and Granny and Grandpa live over there, and we've been on holiday to that place. And they start to picture that, the world is a place, and there are different places besides where we live. So it's a wonderful, fun, relaxing way to get your children to learn. And at that stage, the hard work is really teaching your children the 3 R's, the reading, writing, and maths. That's where you've got to focus your attention and do drills with them. And it's tough, but this is the fun, light side where you can cook and bake and read stories together and play.
So dig in the mud a bit and make your own shelter outside. I just remember all the things that they did. Absolutely. And Little Footprints is again one of those that we get so much feedback from other families stating how it's just transformed their idea of how children learn, because we're unbundling our education and our educational mindsets as we start to homeschool our young children. And folks who have jumped in with literature-based unit studies like Little Footprints are the ones who discover early on that the learning is more about what the kids are absorbing, not what is being forced upon them. So we just have to create that environment, and Little Footprints does that. The other thing that we both used was a program called Before 5 in a Row, which we absolutely loved. And that was, again, storybooks and activities that you can use to, when you're not doing Little Footprints. I'm not quite sure how people buy it. At one stage, there was a talk about it going out of print. I don't know, but that was another way to engage your children with literature and just have really, really great books to read. Anything else?
Yes, I think when you start off like this, it actually grows your confidence as a mother. Yes. Because you see that you don't need somebody telling you what your children must learn. You can just read stories and have fun and explore the world, and they are stimulated and they soak up things and they ask questions and they want to learn more, and you can tailor the learning to suit what they're interested in. So if there's a ladybug on your window today, you can learn about ladybugs. And if they see, that the pumpkin seeds that you threw in the compost have started sprouting, then you do a lesson on germination or whatever it is that pops up in your world. And it helps parents to, as you said, break away from that school mindset that we have to have a distance education provider giving us the national curriculum, and that's what we have to stick to. You can break away from that stress, and you can just watch your children start to blossom and have fun and enjoy learning.
Definitely. So the takeaway is, if it looks like school, I always say this, run the opposite direction. And because that's not what you're doing, you are homeschooling, and it looks completely different. And doing history and geography in this way is the best way to handle it. So anyway, nice chatting, and I see I've got a visitor. So. Cheers.